Hey guys, it's Krishana. I am here with a little mini story time. I never do these, but I was talking to someone and we were just talking about the intersection between sort of spirituality and the way of which I do, which is mediumship and readings and I do spell work as well, and Christianity. So, this might be helpful for some people. Maybe for some people it's not. We'll see. So, I grew up Christian. My mother was Christian and my father was Christian. Now, we weren't super, if I look back, we went to church quite a bit. I wouldn't say that we were strict like most people. There was, because my mother is intuitive, in church she was called a prophet. And my father was just my father would just go to church, you just kind of did. It was more of I think it was more of a tradition than it was in his world it was more of a tradition than it was actually a thing you kind of had to do. My father was a history teacher, and my father would say things Christianity was made to keep the slaves in line. Now, I don't have any particular qualms against Christianity or any religion for that matter. I don't care, but there were some things that weren't really fitting for me. And, if you want me to, I'll go into them. We can do a part 2 about sort of the problems I had growing up being Christian, but I don't feel like we don't have to do that video either. So anyway, when I was growing up, I was actually already intuitive. I was having visions. I actually remember specifically, there was a woman from my church and I used to play with her daughter. I'd go to her daughter's house and I'd play with Barbies and stuff like that. And she would constantly be asking me questions about what I thought was going to happen in the future. And I didn't know anything. I was just kind of a free kid, and so I was just sitting there and playing with Barbies. I think this is going to happen and this is going to happen, and she would kind of do that. My mom actually got really, really angry and ended up yelling at this woman, because you just don't do that to a child. I was a child, but that was just kind of my reality. My mother always told me to develop my gifts. She always taught me to develop my gifts. We also always had some sort of ritual, but it was under the I guess, umbrella of Christianity. When I was probably, I want to say about 12, my mother started getting into new age music and stuff like that. And so I was around the house listening to Enya and stuff, and some people are old enough to remember people like Enya, but I was listening to Enya and all these more was considered at the time new age music. This is kind of a hard video to do because I've never really kind of gone over this story of my growing up and what Christianity meant in my life, or whatever. I remember when I was a child, I was very much into nature. I was very much also into the idea that adults were full of shit, because they were always talking about the limitations of the things that they could do. And for me, I was very much about not being limited in my expression and what I could do. For me, my connection to, God at the time was this very kind of loving experience, this experience full of light, if you will. And I didn't have the sort of feeling of judgment, or and I still don't have the feeling of judgment, or the feeling of quote unquote evil and stuff like that. There were times that I was actually in environments of which had evil around, quote unquote evil around. I did live in a haunted house, a couple of them. and had to encounter things like, you know, demons and various spirits that were darker in nature. And I learned to protect myself. I found as I was growing up that even the transition from what I was doing then to what I'm doing now wasn't really that different, because, you know, my mom prophesied in the church. I prophesied to people. There were rituals going on. There was protection. There was quote unquote spiritual warfare. Like, there wasn't really much of a transition. My mother's a Capricorn. I'm a Leo. If you have a Leo child or you know Leos, we kind of just do whatever we want, you know? And my mom was a Capricorn, and she's very much about structure, and sort of that sort of expression, that's the structure of things. And I just kind of blew that wide open growing up. I remember being, I think my mom would like, she would introduce me to certain things, but then I think she was also like, you know, there was this one quote she'd always say that I think is from the Bible. It's teach a child in the way they should go, and they won't depart from those ways. So I think on some level she just kind of thought like I would, you know, stick with it. But she introduced me to all this kind of stuff, but then she'd kind of like pull back, you know. She'd be like, yeah, here's like some new age stuff and healing and learning and and yoga, because at the time yoga was like, I mean, we're talking about like the 90s, and yoga was this kind of new age spiritual practice that was of the devil. And so, you know, she still taught me about those things. But then she would also kind of wane back and forth because, again, of tradition and structure. And I remember there were times that I had kids around me, right about kind of the, you know, the good old developmental period, the good old, was that 14 or something like that? Maybe, was it 14? I'm not good with like time periods and ages, but I think it was like 13, 14. I was kind of like, you know, discovering myself, and I had friends that were outcasts, and I think The Craft just came out. And I remember specifically, The Craft came out, and I started experimenting with my little group of outcasts, of which I did have. We started experimenting with, you know, it was so funny, that movie. I'm just kind of gonna like digress for a second. That movie was really impactful for a lot of kids and people who are in their 30s now, like mid 30s ish. Like, that movie was really impactful for us, I think, because, you know, for people who were already kind of like felt weird, or they felt like outcasts, or, you know, like me, I was already like, you know, someone who was super intuitive and really into the capabilities of what could be done. And you know, not really liking the fact that most adults didn't believe in their own abilities and power and stuff like that. It was already like that. Then you have a movie that comes out that's all like, that's like kind of just expresses that part of you that you've kind of been like searching for, and you're like, yes, I have an answer now. Which is funny, because I actually became friends with someone who actually owned the shop that was from The Craft. Anyway, so later in life, but anyway, so it was, you know, it was just kind of like, I used to have friends who we would be in class during, like, it wasn't even detention. It was like the first 10 minutes of class. Now that I think about that, I think the teacher was kind of messed up, but whatever. It was like the first 10 minutes of class, we all had to be silent. I think the teacher probably wanted to, like, I don't know if texting was a thing back in the day, but the teacher just didn't want anyone to talk for like the first 10 minutes of class. Like, they were like, it's too early, don't talk. And so me and my friends, which included a dude named Teddy, who was, I think, anorexic. We had this other girl, what was her name? Jamie or Jackie? I forgot, but she was like for us, she was kind of like, you know, she was in our group, and it was weird at the time, which is obviously not weird, because I'm a Black queer woman. I don't care. But at the time, you know, she had like 2 mothers, and that was a thing. Again, we're talking about like the 90s, you know. But you know, she's like, she had 2 mothers, and that was a thing. And anyway, like a lot of people, you know, kind of teased her for being, Janet was her name. Janet was her name. And so it was like me, it was Teddy, it was Janet. There was this other kid who kind of reminds me of like, he was kind of like fragile, and he kind of reminds me of, he actually kind of reminds me of like a really, really young Beck. And there was like another girl, and we just kind of had, what was her name? I remember these faces. Hold on. I can't remember her name. Anyway, Betty. Her name was Betty. So it was a little group of outcasts, and we used to do things like, we used to like try to write spells and we used to try to like make things levitate, you know, because we thought we could do that. And I remember one time I got in so much trouble. Now, you know, back in the day, corporal punishment was totally a thing, and I got a whooping from my mother when she went through my backpack and found a spell that I was trying to write. And she's like, "What is this?" And I was like, "It's a poem." I was a poet, so you know, I was like, "It's a poem I was writing." She's like, "This is not a poem," and I got in trouble for that. But it obviously did not stop me, which is why you are here right now. So, I remember having experiences like astral travel, and just in that sort of time frame, this sort of developmental time frame, and maybe it was all the kind of research that I was doing at the time, or just something I felt within myself. There was a lot of things that were happening in my own sort of witchy development. There was a lot of things that was happening. It was very much like, in some ways, the movie The Witch. There was something that was happening to me, and I couldn't really understand it. So, you know, grow up, you're still, you know, in this household, you know, still going to church. Then I think I got like 15 or 16, and I was, you know, in the youth church, you know, and I was in a big church in Las Vegas, and I was in a youth church, and in this youth church, I was a youth leader, you know, had no problems with God or Jesus, none of that, you know. I think my big transition sort of from being a really, really strict Christian to being a self-proclaimed witch, a goddess, was probably about 19. So I lived between Las Vegas and Los Angeles all my life. When I was 19, I had a friend who went to a psychic, and the psychic was like talking to her, and she's like, "Oh, you have a friend. She's this black girl who's, you know, blah, 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 blah. And she needs to move to Los Angeles." And I kind of just took that as like, okay, I'm moving to Los Angeles. You know, there really wasn't that big of a thought. I really wanted to leave anyway. I was going to move to London actually originally, which is really funny because I'm now in France, but I always knew I would be in Europe. So it's like not like a thing. I was going to move to London originally, and but I had never lived out of my mom's house, and so this whole thing came for me to move to Los Angeles. So I just did. Once I got to Los Angeles, that's, I think, when my biggest sort of witchy development happened. Actually, that's the biggest time that happened, but right before then, my timelines are a little, and I can't edit these because I don't know how to edit videos, so you're just going to have to listen to the story if you want to. But so before then, actually, I was in college, and my mother was at this time really railing against me being a witch. She was really railing against me moving away from the church. And as she was kind of railing against it, I was really railing towards, being a witch. And in fact, I kind of covertly made her pay for my college course, which was the history of witchcraft. At the time, I was just being a little shit. But it really did help, actually. And I met a lot of people who were, very much like me. I got introduced to, there's a Sekhmet temple in the desert in Vegas. I got introduced to that. I got introduced to who I think was actually run by the person who was teaching the history of witchcraft course in college. And so, I met a friend named Samantha, of course. And Samantha gave my first deck of tarot cards, which actually these, I still use them today. She gave me my first deck of tarot cards, and that was kind of the beginning, I guess, of the journey, and the real development happened once I moved to Los Angeles. So once I moved to Los Angeles, I found my kind of witchy spiritual community. That was the first thing I did, actually, because I had kind of sort of developed one in college. And I liked having that. And so we'd go and we'd celebrate Beltane and stuff like that. I was never really into covens. And we did have a little bit of a group, but I'm just not like a joiner. So I'm not a coven girl. And so, I'm trying to think what happened. Oh, so I ended up going to Los Angeles, and I was living in North Hollywood. For those who don't know, North Hollywood is on the other side of Hollywood. And I was living in North Hollywood, on Lankershim and Otsego. And there used to be a shop that was called, the I can't remember, Black Cauldron or something like that. Anyway, and it was actually owned by a guy who, this is all kind of really weird connecty shit, but like a guy who actually became a really good friend of mine, like later, like years later. But it was owned by him and his partner. And they used to have these rituals. It was actually so the way that it was set up was like there was this shop, and then there was this little alleyway, and then there was like my little studio that I lived with this girl. And so I would go there with my roommate, and we would go to these little rituals and things like that. But it was like literally right in front of my house. And so, I started going to these like rituals during, different like kind of like high holidays and stuff like that. And then eventually I found Panpipes, which was the shop at the time, the shop that was kind of known for, I think at the time it was like the oldest occult shop in Los Angeles. And it was owned by a couple people, and one of them actually became really good friends with, who actually owns Pan's Apotheca now. It's in like off, I think Melrose, I want to say. No, maybe not Melrose. Anyway, it's in you can look it up, Pan's Apotheca, which is in Los Angeles. So I ended up becoming kind of like friends with that shop, and then I used to go to their rituals. And so that's kind of when my big development happened. As far as my like mediumship development, kind of outside of the Christian world, I remember it was just people would constantly be like, oh my God, I have like this, like either like this haunted house, or I have this situation, or, I was always that friend people come to for like kind of spiritual advice. That's something that was obscure that they couldn't talk to anybody else about. I have this, like, I actually had a friend, one of my friends, I don't think I should probably say who they are, but one of my friends had a like sleeping spirit, like kind of an incubus, succubus type of situation. And I, dealt with that. But again, you have to remember, I grew up Christian. And so because I grew up Christian, I kind of like had like the backbones of learning how to like deal with spirits. Because that's kind of there's in Christianity is always kind of this idea that there's this war and this battle, and you have to sort of like to learn how to combat it and stuff like that, but you're not taking the power within yourself. You're kind of you're using the name of God, but it's just a different way of doing it. And so anyway, I started developing this, and I think I didn't really start like doing like real like spell work that I could really call spell work until maybe a few years later. I would go to Panpipes or whatever, and I'd go get candles, and I start doing candles like that. And then my best friend that I actually met at a ritual invited me to a hoodoo like a hoodoo festival in Northern California. And I went there and I was just like blown away. It's actually where I met Chiron Armand, who I work with quite a bit. You guys have seen him quite a bit in my live videos. But you know, I met him there. And at the time it was one of those things where I had already felt these things. These things were already a part of me. I just didn't have context for them. I didn't really know where to go with them. And so, yeah, so I needed context. And so I started kind of like, you know, delving into, these parts of myself. I started delving into learning spell work. I started really exploring, and I think like I don't regret any of these moments of exploration. I was trained in folk magic. I still do folk magic, but I do a lot of different other things too now. But it's really been, I'm like 35 now. It's been like my whole life of sort of psychic and spiritual development. So if we're talking about my views on Christianity, I don't have a problem with Christianity. I do have a problem with people not taking up their own power. I do have a problem with people spiritually bypassing, and not really delving into the root of issues. I do have a problem with that. I do have a problem, I guess, with, I think how people are seen and the idea that people aren't just like medicine. So what I mean by that is if you kind of take away Christianity and you go into things like shamanism and stuff like that, there's an idea that who people are is medicine. That somehow who they are contribute to the development of everything else around it. They cultivate things around them by this sort of process of individuation and authenticity. And I feel like when you put too many restrictions on that, I feel what ends up happening is that people, first of all, create this sort of codependent relationship with a deity or with a god. And I feel like codependency in that sort of way is sort of taking away from human experience and who people are in general. Also, I feel like it creates a limited belief system and a limited ideology about what you're capable of, because you're too scared to explore that. And I feel like when the kind of quotes go around about like, you know, the fear of God isn't also like fearing yourself, in my opinion. And so what's really awesome is actually become someone who people like years later, you know, find, and they're like, oh, you know what? You being who you are made me more comfortable with me being me. Or I've had talks with family members even more recently who, you know, they were so used to the way that they were doing things. I have this little like bug here, just go away. They were so used to the way that they were doing things or the ways that they were raised, and now they're having questions. They have no one else to go to but this stranger over here, this weirdo right here. And so there's a medicine in me being me and me being very free and open to exploring that. And there's a medicine in people actually kind of taking up their own quote unquote cross and running with it and seeing how far they can go. And also, you know, and also kind of knowing sort of like, you know, protective, you know, things and charms, amulets and stuff like that. There isn't, but for those who are sort of questioning the transition, for those who are kind of curious and stuff like that, A, I'm here to talk to you. But B, there isn't much that if you're really, really into it, there's really not much that you're doing in that context that you wouldn't be doing in another context. It's just kind of the way of which you do them. Like for me personally, at the time I was like doing everything and kind of like, you know, I serve humanity. I serve nature. I serve myself. I am not a person who is very much about serving another deity or being under or bowing or kneeling. That's not something I do. But that's my personal path, but also I'm very much about my own liberation and the liberation of others. That's kind of, I guess, the big difference is that I just don't want to be complicit in my own oppression. And so me taking up my own identity, and the power that comes with me claiming and proclaiming that I am a witch, and taking my own fire unto myself is quite possibly, I think, the most powerful thing anyone can do. Yeah. So anyway, if you have questions or want me to continue this talk, go ahead and leave a comment. I hope this is helpful. You can email me, yeah. All right. Happy searching.